where the member who's just resumed his seat has left off, and actually asked the Minister to take a call specifically around the question of the Hiranui Water Conservation Order, because I think we actually have to seriously think about what this bill is actually doing in terms of a process that's well and truly underway. And for the benefit of the House, there are hearings set down for the Hiranui Water Conservation Orders to start on the 31st of May. So they're actually set down to begin. There's a process in train where people who have begun a process, they're part of a process now, and this bill is walking in the middle of that process and saying that's all over, that's completely discarded as a result of this legislation. And I think that the government actually needs to stand up today in the House and acknowledge that that's what they're doing. There's a hearing set down to begin on the 31st of May for 6 weeks to resolve once and for all issues around the Hiranui Water Conservation Order, and this bill is going to totally remove the ability of the Environment Court to hear that. It's going to weaken the legal test, as Russell Norman's just said. It'll be re-notified, and then at the end of this, it's the commissioners who are going to have a massive job on their hands anyway as a result of what's been done in this legislation, who will have to hear it and issue a decision. And then that decision can only be appealed on a point of law. So in fact, in this bill, we're completely changing around the way in which this very important water conservation order has been dealt with. And no one from the government has actually been prepared yet to stand up and say, yes, we're taking away the legal rights of a number of people and a number of groups who've been involved in a process for some considerable time on this water conservation order, but nobody from the government seems prepared to actually stand up and say, that's what we're doing. We're actually taking away legal rights, and we're having the announcements already made today around, that's right, Mr Bridges, we've got announcements today around the Foreshore and Seabed Act where people have campaigned in the past at great length on people's right to due legal process. Well, what's happening about due legal process here? What's happening about the water conservation orders that are already being discussed, for which there is a process already in place? And I would ask respectfully for the Minister and the Chair to take a call and clear up and ensure that we get an understanding here that for the Hiranui Water Conservation Order, that process, where hearings are already set down to begin on the 31st of May, is gone. Is that the situation we've got? Because if it is, we are putting people who've been in this process in a very difficult position. I also want to pick up the point that Russell Norman made about the question of what is now the test. Is the test going... So the ability to impose the national park equivalent on rivers is gone. That seems to have gone, but for Canterbury, but not for the rest of New Zealand. So now for Canterbury, we have a different set of rules that we do for the rest of New Zealand in terms of water conservation orders. I don't think this bill is going to lead to any streamlining of the process around the water conservation orders. In fact, I think it's going to make it more difficult, because the role is now falling to the commissioners, who have an extremely busy process in front of them in terms of taking on the responsibilities of ECAN, and now they're being put in front of them this particular water conservation order. The process was meant to be completed by mid-July. The hearings were going to be over and the court would be reporting by mid-July. And now we've got a bill where the Environment Court's been totally taken out of the process. The commissioners are going to take over. First, they're going to give the conservation applicants 30 days to amend their application. Then the amended application will be followed by an additional public submission period, even though there's already been a complete public submission period anyway. And the commissioners will hold a hearing during which they'll be required to take no account whatsoever of the special tribunal that the Minister for the Environment has already set up for the Hiranui Water Conservation Order. And the decision of the commissioners then, after they've heard this evidence, can only be appealed on a point of law. So we're actually reducing the rights of a number of people who've already been heavily involved in this process, who've already made submissions, who thought they were part of a process. This law is pulling that away. Now, there are overall concerns about water conservation orders and what this will mean for them across the Canterbury region. But I would like a response from the Minister specifically around Hiranui, because there is a great deal of concern out there from a number of people involved in that.
Mr Chairman.
I call the Honourable Nick Smith.
Mr Chairman, I want to